uncover the shocking truth behind the military's growing defiance towards Donald Trump, as high-ranking officials warn he is unfit to command during a critical war with Iran. Hundreds of generals and admirals, gathered from distant lands like Europe and Asia, stood today under the same roof in Quantico, Virginia, to receive their commander-in-chief. Yet, there was no applause, a detail that immediately caught his attention. Military leaders are now actively ignoring, even excluding, Donald Trump from critical government decisions, especially since the war with Iran began. These images you saw at the start are from October 2025 inches, Quantico, Virginia. Quantico is the largest naval base in the United States and also home to the headquarters of the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency. Even then, it was clear the military was far from pleased with Donald Trump, who expected to be greeted with applause, fanfare, and standing ovations, accustomed as he is to the clapping seals he has in his cabinet. Forgive me, but it's true. His closest circle dares not contradict him or say anything that might provoke his anger, even when reality differs wildly from his perception. The crucial point now is that senior military leaders, both within the United States and abroad, are warning that Donald Trump is incapable of fulfilling his duties as commander-in-chief. This is extraordinary news, a bombshell, because, according to the military, Donald Trump represents an imminent threat to the United States and to countries worldwide. We're not talking about just one or two disgruntled soldiers or lower ranks, like those on the aircraft carriers USS Gerald R. Ford or USS Abraham Lincoln, who are reportedly receiving increasingly limited and scarce food rations. We are talking about top military brass, admirals, generals, majors, and military leaders who are leaking to the press how dire the situation has become. They reveal how they must keep Donald Trump out of the crisis room, out of the decision-making chambers, because his behavior is so erratic and his temper is worsening to such an extent that his mere presence could cause far more problems and, more importantly, lead to many more lives lost. That's how serious this situation is. For example, you're seeing a Wall Street Journal publication on screen stating that the Pentagon warns about the risks of a major operation against Iran. What does this imply? The military knows. They are strategists. They have military careers. They are educated. They have the intellect to understand that this war is leading the United States, and indeed the entire world, nowhere good. The Wall Street Journal has several articles on this very topic. One, I'm showing you here, describes how, behind Donald Trump's public bravado, he is grappling with his own fears. They even speak of him running through the White House, shouting, insulting, panicking, behaving like a lunatic, expressing fear of losing, only to act moments later as if he's invincible and the war is being won without opposition. It's truly strange behavior. You've likely seen it in many of my videos where his posts, even a single tweet or X post, lack coherence. He might say, "When you see soldiers," or others, but generally soldiers walking around without legs and without arms, or face that has been blown off, that is saliva. It was Iran that did that. So we have a very different view than other presidents. They have gotten away with murder for 47 years. They're not going to get away with it anymore. He shifts from one minute to the next, declaring Iran annihilated and helpless, then suggesting they have another army or another missile to launch. He goes from claiming the war is being won to saying he gets along very well with Iran, then to demanding they open the Strait of Hormuz, you damn bastards. It's a chaotic mix of information, tweets, character, and temperament, which is precisely why he is isolated from key decisions. This erratic behavior, according to some specialists I've reported on this channel, you've surely seen it, but if not, I'll quickly tell you, has led to discussions of a possible diagnosis of frontotemporal dementia. This is how they are describing his abrupt, strange shifts, how he swings from one extreme to another. The military has detected this, even without being doctors, psychiatrists, or analysts. They simply know that their boss, the supreme leader of one of the world's most powerful armies, perhaps once the most powerful, but its hegemony has declined, much like Donald Trump's own shifts and pronouncements, is exhibiting alarming instability. Here's an article from the Journal that asks, why top military brass kept Trump out during high-risk Iran extraction operation. This refers to the supposed mission to rescue a pilot shot down in those invisible jets, which Donald Trump imagined you could stand next to and ask, "Where's the plane?" That's how he envisioned them. These invisible jets, of course, are invisible to radar, which you and I understand perfectly well. But that operation, which was certainly not about rescuing any soldier, took place just one day before Donald Trump announced a supposed truce. The real operation was a lightning invasion of Iran, aimed at seizing enriched uranium where they believed it was stored. Of course, they found nothing. Radio transmissions from weapons system officers immediately raised suspicions, as officials feared the Iranians might be using deceptive signals to lure U.S. rescue forces into a deadly ambush deep inland. Furthermore, there are reports that in that operation, the United States lost far more aircraft than in its entire war with Vietnam. Imagine the spectacular failure of that absurd, ridiculous mission that achieved nothing. So, the next day, Donald Trump promised, or rather announced, a 4-day, 2-week truce that is now about to expire. You see the date here. This truce is supposedly expiring tomorrow, but after that, and in the peace negotiations, he announced that Iran would surrender its enriched uranium. Yes, the 2,000 kilograms it possesses, when this only exists in Donald Trump's mind, not in reality. Even Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, whose extensive military and strategic resume includes, as his greatest qualification for the position, having been a Fox News presenter, has dismissed about a dozen senior military commanders, including the Chief of Staff of the Army, General Randy George, and dozens more. When these top military leaders were compelled to testify before the House of Representatives last weekend and questioned about these dismissals, they stated, "Look, we don't have answers. You'd have to ask Pete Hegseth directly. We're not sure why he did that." In addition to them, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was also dismissed, as was Admiral Lisa Franchetti, Chief of Naval Operations, and the first woman to hold that position. Also dismissed was the vice chairman of the Air Force Staff, General James Said, and the top lawyers of this corporation. What has been happening is a substitution. Donald Trump spoke of regime change when this war began. Well, he is achieving it, but he is achieving it within his own country, within the U.S. Department of Defense. This is where he has replaced individuals with years of military careers with people who are, curiously, very obedient and loyal to him, incapable of saying no. That is why the U.S. military is sidelining Donald Trump from critical strategic decisions to prevent this from escalating into a much larger event. Even since February, there have been these warnings. General Dan Kane warned everyone within the Pentagon, "Don't do this. Don't start a war with Iran because it will be a disaster. It will require immense resources, vast weaponry that we cannot sustain. Moreover, our image will be severely damaged, regardless of our inability to sustain the resupply of weapons for such a prolonged war." That is why this ceasefire, this pause that Donald Trump initiated 6 weeks ago, was for that very purpose: to recover, to rearm, to resupply with missiles and weaponry, to continue the war as planned. The plan was never to end the war, but to continue it. This is evident, as I mentioned, in the rations provided to the sailors of the world's most advanced aircraft carrier, which boasts powerful nuclear propulsion, but whose sailors barely have enough to eat. You're seeing it on screen now. A service member has revealed the reality of living aboard a prominent U.S. warship. A viral image from the USS Abraham Lincoln, CVN-72, shows a meal that raises serious questions. On the tray, a small portion of boiled carrots, a dry ground beef patty, and a gray slab of processed meat. Most compartments are empty. The image has sparked outrage, especially considering this occurs while the U.S. defense budget exceeds trillions of dollars. What is happening? This is not standard Navy life. The Lincoln, along with ships like the USS LLH-7, is deployed in a high-intensity environment in the Middle East, with no port calls, incessant operations, and strained logistical chains. Families of sailors and Marines report a drastic decline in food quality. Meals are described as bland, portions too small, and fresh produce almost non-existent. Some say the crew is hungry, rationing their food and dividing portions. They warn of a drop in morale, and now a larger concern arises. How will sailors sustain themselves if this continues? Because in a conflict zone, endurance is everything. Long hours, high stress, continuous operations, and without adequate nutrition, fatigue sets in faster, focus drops, and performance suffers. Support packages have been suspended due to logistical problems, with no extra food or emergency supplies. So, how do they survive for now? By adapting, stretching rations, sharing the little available, relying on discipline and routine. But this is not sustainable. Even the best warship needs to feed its crew. So, why is this happening? Long deployments without resupply and constant operations push logistics to their limit. That's where the contrast becomes stark. An enormous Pentagon budget and empty trays at sea. The broader question is, does modern warfare take care of those who need it most? Because ultimately, war isn't just about weapons. It's about the people who operate them. For now, these people are abandoned. Those are the paltry, meager trays served to them. That's how Donald Trump is feeding his sailors. So, imagine how high morale is. Speaking now of the troops on the front lines. Continuing with the investigations by this newspaper, which has been the primary reporter on this, it reveals that military advisors intentionally exclude Donald Trump from the command room during operations, particularly the one I mentioned, involving the supposed rescue of an aviator. For instance, this aviator, whom Donald Trump claimed was a colonel and had been rescued, he never gave his name, never showed a photo, never provided any details. He merely said the aviator was injured, managed to climb a peak over 2,000 meters high, and was rescued from there. So, imagine, he was injured, climbed a 2,000-meter peak, was rescued, and yet Trump doesn't even know his name. Or perhaps it never happened and exists only in Donald Trump's imagination. According to this outlet, Donald Trump was in such a volatile state of agitation after learning that Iran had shot down a U.S. drone that he spent hours yelling at his assistants in the West Wing, obsessed with the consequences this would bring and how an invisible U.S. aircraft could have been eliminated. The point is, he was extremely agitated, screaming, and nothing was being resolved. Nor could a cool head prevail to plan a military strategy. This operation ultimately failed, just as aircraft became trapped in the desert sand, leaving many U.S. personnel stranded there. It is said that Donald Trump left that room at 2 a.m., only to publish threatening notes against Iran 6 hours later, demanding they open the Strait of Hormuz, you sons of bitches, completely unhinged. There have also been recent leaks indicating that major rifts are forming within the military itself, driven by low morale, ethical concerns, and a growing number of service members who are either choosing to retire early, refusing to re-enlist, or flat out abandoning their contracts regardless of the consequences. So much so that the United States is now automatically enrolling all eligible young people. Previously, this was voluntary, but now they are so desperate because their own soldiers are withdrawing, knowing they are fighting a war that is unethical and, more importantly, a war not for the United States, but to support the Zionist impulses of Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel. They know they have no reason to sacrifice their lives for another homeland that is not their own. Many of you, perhaps even you watching me now, left comments like this. What a shame and what a danger for the world that Donald Trump is in such a volatile mental state, to say the least here on YouTube, so it doesn't get censored. What a shame he is like this, especially not for him personally, because I don't think he evokes much empathy, but for the danger, the risk he represents to the world. What a shame that he holds the nuclear codes to activate a bomb, something he had subtly threatened to do with Iran. Let's hope that moment never truly comes to pass, because while that possibility looms, the war continues to escalate. The truce has already been broken. Here you are seeing images of a recent boarding by a U.S. vessel of an Iranian ship that was transporting. Well, if you want to know what they did, and how the United States once again breaks the truce and prepares to attack Iran, then I invite you to watch this video here. Thank you for your time. See you soon.